All right, welcome to the final On My Shelf of the summer. It doesn't mean that we're stopping the live broadcast. It just means that we're going to change formats again when we get into the fall. Yesterday was the last sermon of our summer of prayer, which I think went really well. And I hope it went well for you. I hope it was meaningful to you. We're going to be doing something different in the fall. I'm going to be gone next week, but the following Sunday, we're going to start a series on Ephesians. We're going to be going through the book of Ephesians chapter by chapter, and we're going to be looking at how Paul outlines God's plan for the church, God's plan for the universe, really, and the mission of the church within that plan. And the goal of that lessons or that sermon series will be to prepare us for our mission as a church, because right at the Sunday after we finish that will be our centennial. So today, the book that I want to talk about is actually more connected with the series that we're going to do than it is with yesterday's sermon. Yesterday we talked about the prayer of faith and how we pray for big, impossible things. And the Bible seems to say that God answers those prayers. And so we talked about how, what we should expect from those prayers, what it means to pray in faith. And if you've ever struggled with feeling like you don't have enough faith when you pray, I would recommend that you listen to that sermon, because that's something that I struggled with. And I had some important realizations about that. But today, the focus of On My Shelf has been to talk about books that are really important in my development. And I tried to pick one specifically that had to do with the different things we talked about in the series. But for this last week, we're going to talk about a book that really has nothing to do with the sermon, but has been a very important and formative book for me. This is a book that was assigned to me in seminary. I read this as a part of my theology classwork, and it's called A Peculiar People by Rodney Clapp. Now, if you listen to my sermon that I gave on the Friday night of convention, which you can hear on our church podcast, you'll have heard me talk about political theology and how that was something I got really interested in. And this book was kind of my doorway into that, I think. I had already started to think along these lines, but this book really opened my eyes. And I don't even know if this is the best book on the subject. We're actually going to be talking about two books, because I'm going to bring in another one by a guy named William T Cavanaugh, who is probably my favorite author in this area of political theology. But so I've never really thought about what I think the best book is in that area, but this is definitely the book that most influenced, or that's really opened my eyes to this area and started me down that path. So let me explain what I mean, because when I talk about political theology, your eyes may glaze over or you may clench your fists in anger. And I want to be clear about what I'm talking about. So when you read this book, when you read A Peculiar People, he begins by talking about the way Christians feel kind of useless these days. If you think back to the role that religion played in society in centuries past, when the church was absolutely vital to everything that people were doing, it was the center of everybody's lives. And now we kind of feel like we're in the way and people don't really need us anymore. And not as many people go to church. People don't immediately respect pastors and priests and people in authority in the church. There's a big sense that what the church says and what Christians say isn't really that important. And so he's talking about this feeling of uselessness that we have because we live in a post-Christian society, which just means that Christianity doesn't dominate our society anymore. And that's been true. I mean, Nietzsche was the first one who really made that claim in the late mid 1800s. So this post-Christian phase has actually been going on for a while. And there are two main ways that Clapp talks about that people respond to this feeling of uselessness. One response is called secularization. And that's when we try and separate faith, Christianity, and the rest of the world. Because it used to be that, like there was a time when when the Roman Catholic Church was one of the most important political entities out there, and like they were involved in negotiating treaties and doing all, and the church used to have a lot of influence in a lot of different ways, and now it really doesn't. And so some people will say, well, that's because faith and religion is supposed to be a very private thing. So Christianity isn't about structuring society. It's not about laws. It's not about those kinds of, it's not about politics at all. It's a private thing. It's an inner thing. It's, when you go to the extreme, what they really do is they basically turn God into a therapist. Say God is really just about making me have peace and feel good and feel fulfilled. But Christianity is not about structuring society in any particular way. And so it should stay private. So we'll have religion on Sundays and we'll have politics on the other 6 days, but they don't need to mix up. You just keep it to yourself. That's one approach. The other approach is called, well, I call nationalization or nationalism. Christian nationalism is when you go to the other extreme and you say, no, Christianity is supposed to dominate our politics and our laws and our culture the way it used to. And so we need to have Christian politicians. We need to have Christian laws. We need to have, all of our society needs to reflect Christian morality, and we need to be a Christian nation. And that approach has been seeing a resurgence in the past 30, 40 years, and is actually a pretty big political issue right now. And so those are ways to respond to the fact that the church doesn't seem to have the same influence that it used to. But Rodney Clapp argues that neither of those are the right approach because they don't understand what the church actually is. And this is where it becomes political theology. Basically, what Rodney Clapp will argue is that the church is not supposed to be a private club that has nothing to do with the structures of society and the rules that we live by, but it's also not supposed to be a political party that tries to control the government and tries to set up a Christian nation. What he would say, the way I would paraphrase what he says is that the church is a Christian nation, that the church is its own society, its own gathering of people that can influence the world distinctly from the government. And so people either tend to think, this can be difficult to kind of wrap your head around because we're so entrenched in these two ways of thinking. We will think either Christianity is not about politics at all, it's simply private, or Christianity is all about national politics. It's all about the government and controlling the government and passing laws and all those kinds of things. And what political theology would say is, no, the church is its own thing, its own society that exists around the world and in the territory of all these other governments, but it accomplishes its goals on its own. So in a way, it's kind of saying the church is its own nation. The church is its own country. And it's actually very interesting when you look at the parallels between the similarities between a government and a church. They both give you an identity. I am an American because I am a citizen under the American government, but I'm also a Christian because I am a follower of Jesus Christ. And those are both parts of my identity, and different people will rank those in different places. I'm an American first, or I'm a Christian first. And some people would say that's the same thing, that being an American is being a Christian. And so that's Christian nationalism. Both of them require our allegiance. When we become a Christian, we are saying Jesus is Lord. And that word Lord, that means that he has authority over me. We are taught to obey Jesus. He is supposed to be our king. And so we declare our allegiance to God. In fact, the word faith in Greek that's in the New Testament, it can also be translated as allegiance, that we will follow Jesus. And of course, we also say the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. You know, we pledge allegiance to our government. You take an oath of office. They both work towards particular goods. So the American government has a goal that changes with political parties, but it's working towards building an ideal society, and it sets that ideal itself. It decides what does an ideal society look like. You know, our Constitution gives us principles of what an ideal political society is supposed to look like. The church also has its own view of what is good and what is right and what our society is supposed to look like, and that comes from Scripture. Both of them have authority structures. There are presidents and governors and legislators and Congress people. There are pastors and elders and deacons and deaconesses, and depending on your church, there's bishops and archbishops and popes. And of course, most importantly, at the top of every church is Jesus Christ, who is the King. Both collect money. The government forces you to. Churches do it, well, hopefully it's voluntary. I have heard horror stories of churches that force you, but they do collect money to fund what they're doing and to dispense it. You know, when people are in need of help, they will go to government entities, welfare and things, government programs, things like that, and they'll go to churches. And they both involve worship. And this is the one that kind of blew my mind. And here's where I'll reference another book. I don't have the book in print. I have it on my Kindle. It's called Migrations of the Holy by William T Cavanaugh. And his argument is that people aren't getting, as time goes on, people aren't getting less religious. They're just shifting their loyalty from their God to their country. And that's what we're finding worldwide, is that the things that we used to do with God, we now do with our country. And so our governments and our nations are taking the place of our churches. We're just as religious, but we're religious about our nations. And the parallels are very interesting. When you think about who do you worship? Who do you sing songs about to celebrate? You sing happy birthday, people. You'll sing love songs to particular people, but when it comes to songs that we sing to praise a particular person or a particular entity, when we sing praise songs to God, and we sing praise songs to America. When you look at holy objects, what are the things that we treat especially holy, is unique? Well, in some churches, you'll have crosses and crucifixes and goblets and different objects that are holy, that are unique, that you treat differently. We have our communion table that you wouldn't just put anything on there during the church service. And although we wouldn't say it's magic or holy in some kind of ultimate sense, we treat it respectfully. But in some churches, that is, the bread and the cup and all of those things, they're very, very holy and unique. Your attitude there depends on what church you're in. But where we always treat an object, it's holy. It's the flag. The flag does not touch the ground. The flag, it must be the American flag must be a certain height compared to other flags. There are certain orders that it goes in. We treat the flag as holy. By any definition of the word, we treat the flag as holy. In fact, that's why there's been this huge debate about kneeling with the flag. It's because it's a debate over how do you show proper reverence for the flag. One side believes that kneeling is disrespectful to the flag. It disrespects the holiness of the flag. and another side believes that it is an appropriate way to show respect and to acknowledge the holiness of the flag while also protesting violence. And it's all a debate about holy symbols. When you look at the way that we deal with our identity as Christians and our identity as Americans, and in other countries, is not specifically American, although Americans especially do this. They're both very religious, and so all of this is to say that what Rodney Clapp and William T Cavanaugh and others would argue is that, as Stanley Hauerwas is another good one, that our identity or the church is its own society, its own body of people that forms its members. Like it influences our society. It changes the way we live. And so as one of the decisions that I had to make when I graduated from college with my degree in government is, how do I want to spend my life trying to change the world and trying to influence people? And one way I could do that is to be part of the government. But ultimately what I decided, and the reason I'm a pastor, is because I decided that the church through Jesus Christ had more power to really transform society. And you can see this in obvious ways, like when there's a big natural disaster and churches come together and give more material and monetary aid to the survivors than the government does. And they come together and they do all these material services. But there's also the sense in which going to church forms your identity of who you are and how you're supposed to behave. How do we decide what people owe us? Is it based on the Bill of Rights that tells me the things that I can demand of other people? Like I demand that people treat me in these particular ways? Or do I decide that based on Scripture, which tells me that I'm supposed to love my enemies and I'm supposed to be selfless and sacrificial? Those are two different ways of understanding my identity and what I am owed by other people and what I owe to other people and how I'm supposed to live in this world. And when we go to church and when we form these bonds in our communities, and when we form the bonds within our congregation, and then we take that out and we influence our communities by the ways we serve them, what we are doing is we're creating social change without actually going through the government. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong for Christians to get involved in politics and get involved in the laws that we pass, although I think we need to be careful when we label certain things as Christian positions or Christian laws or Christian candidates, things like that. But what I am saying is that the primary way that God intends to change the world through people is not through governments, but through churches. And that God's chosen instrument to alter the world, to save people and to save the globe, when he works through people, ultimately it's all through Jesus Christ, but when he chooses people as his instruments, it is the church, not necessarily a nation or the nations. God doesn't need the power of anybody's military. God doesn't need the power of anybody's economy. God chooses to use the people that have given their allegiance to him, and that's the church. And so for me, I believe very much that the most powerful place I can be, the place where I can do the most good in this world ultimately, is in a church. I mean, I'm in a church of 125 people, and I'm 10 miles away from the state capitol. And this has nothing to do with what party is in control or which people hold office there, but I believe that this church and Turner Church of God across the road and Turning Point downtown and all the churches around here, I believe that we can do more good for this state and for this region than the State House, than the people who meet in Salem. And that's not a bash on the politicians. That's simply my belief that God's chosen instrument to change the world is the church. And God has more power to change the world than anybody. And so I want to be in the center of what God is doing to transform our world. And that's why I'm here. And that motivates me, that excites me, that makes me passionate about being a pastor and being a Christian. Being a pastor doesn't make me any more a part of God's plan. It just defines my role in it. So every Christian gets to be a part of what God is doing to change the world. That's what makes me passionate about political theology. Anyway, so the book was A Peculiar People by Rodney Clapp. I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend anything by William T Cavanaugh. He also wrote Being Consumed, which is a good book on political economics, theological religious economics. Very fascinating. But anyway, that's a very interesting area. I would love to talk to you more about it. If you ever want to get a cup of coffee at the Turnaround Cafe and talk more about this kind of stuff, I will talk to you about it for hours. And I think it's fascinating. I think it's really important for us as we understand our role as Christians in America in 2019. So that's our last on our shelf. I may do a broadcast next week while Casey and I are in Hawaii, maybe a little teaser about our upcoming sermon series. Maybe not. Maybe I'll be too distracted by our vacation. But otherwise, I will see you again here in 2 weeks when we will be doing the first episode of our new season of Deleted Scenes. So thank you so much for watching. If you're local, I hope to see you here for worship. And otherwise, I hope to see you back here on this channel in a couple of weeks for Deleted Scenes. God bless.